Chapter 18. Birthday Surprises. The next day, Harry confided in both Ron and Hermione the task that Dumbledore had set him, though separately, for Hermione still refused to remain in Ron's presence longer than it took to give him a contemptuous look. Ron thought that Harry was unlikely to have any trouble with Slughorn at all. "He loves you," he said over breakfast, waving an airy fork full of fried egg. "Won't refuse you anything, will he? Not his little potions, Prince. Just hang back after class this afternoon and ask him." Hermione, however, took a gloomier view. "He must be determined to hide what really happened if Dumbledore couldn't get it off him," she said in a low voice as they stood in the deserted, snowy courtyard at break. Horcruxes. Horcruxes. I've never even heard of them." "You haven't?" Harry was disappointed. He had hoped that Hermione might have been able to give him a clue as to what Horcruxes were. "They must be really advanced dark magic, or why would Voldemort have wanted to know about them? I think it's going to be very difficult to get the information, Harry. You'll have to be very careful about how you approach Slughorn. Think out a strategy." "Ron reckons I should just hang back after potions this afternoon." "Oh, well, if Won thinks that, you better do it," she said, flaring up at once. "After all, when has Won's judgment ever been faulty?" "Hermione, can't you—" "No," she said angrily and stormed away, leaving Harry alone and ankle-deep in snow. Potions lessons were uncomfortable enough these days, seeing as Harry, Ron, and Hermione had to share a desk. Today, Hermione moved her cauldron around the table so that she was close to Ernie, and ignored both Harry and Ron. "What have you done?" Ron muttered to Harry, looking at Hermione's haughty profile. Before Harry could answer, Slughorn was calling for silence from the front of the room. Settle down, please. Quickly now, lots of work to get through this afternoon. Goldpalot's third law. Who can tell me?" "But Miss Granger can, of course." Hermione recited at top speed. "Goldpalot's third law states that the antidote for a blended poison will be equal to more than the sum of the antidotes for each of the separate components." "Precisely," beamed Slughorn. 10 points for Gryffindor. Now, if we accept Goldpalot's third law as true..." Harry was going to have to take Slughorn's word for it that Goldpalot's third law was true, because he had not understood any of it. Nobody apart from Hermione seemed to be following what Slughorn said next either. "Which means, of course, that assuming we've achieved correct identification of the potion's ingredients by Scarpin's Revelaspell, our primary aim is not the relatively simple one of selecting antidotes to those ingredients in and of themselves, but to find that added component that will, by an almost alchemical process, transform these disparate elements." Ron was sitting beside Harry with his mouth half open, drooling absently on his new copy of Advanced Potion Making. Ron kept forgetting that he could no longer rely on Hermione to help him out of trouble when he failed to grasp what was going on. "And so," finished Slughorn, "I want each of you to come and take one of these phials from my desk. You are to create an antidote for the poison within it before the end of the lesson. Good luck, and don't forget your protective gloves." Hermione had left her stool and was halfway towards Slughorn's desk before the rest of the class had realized it was time to move. And by the time Harry, Ron, and Ernie returned to the table, she had already tipped the contents of her phial into her cauldron and was kindling a fire underneath it. "It's a shame that the prince won't be able to help you much with this, Harry," she said brightly as she straightened up. "You have to understand the principles involved this time. No shortcuts or cheats." Annoyed, Harry uncorked the poison he had taken from Slughorn's desk, which was a garish shade of pink, tipped it into his cauldron, and lit a fire underneath it. He did not have the faintest idea what he was supposed to do next. He glanced around at Ron, who was now standing there looking rather gormless, having copied everything Harry had done. "You sure the prince hasn't got any tips?" Ron muttered to Harry. Harry pulled out his trusty copy of Advanced Potion Making and turned to the chapter on antidotes. There was Goldpalot's third law, stated word for word as Hermione had recited it, but not a single illuminating note in the prince's hand to explain what it meant. Apparently the prince, like Hermione, had had no difficulty understanding it. "Nothing," said Harry gloomily. Hermione was now waving her wand enthusiastically over her cauldron. Unfortunately, they could not copy the spell she was doing because she was now so good at nonverbal incantations that she did not need to say the words aloud. Ernie Macmillan, however, was muttering "Specialis Revelio" over his cauldron, which sounded impressive, so Harry and Ron hastened to imitate him. It took Harry only 5 minutes to realize that his reputation as the best potion maker in the class was crashing around his ears. Slughorn had peered hopefully into his cauldron on his first circuit of the dungeon, preparing to exclaim in delight as he usually did, and instead had withdrawn his head hastily, coughing, as the smell of bad eggs overwhelmed him. Hermione's expression could not have been any smugger. She had loathed being outperformed in every potions class. She was now decanting the mysteriously separated ingredients of her poison into 10 different crystal vials. More to avoid watching this irritating sight than anything else, Harry bent over the Half-Blood Prince's book and turned a few pages with unnecessary force. And there it was, scrawled right across a long list of antidotes. Just shove a Bezoar down their throats. Harry stared at these words for a moment. Hadn't he once, long ago, heard of Bezoars? Hadn't Snape mentioned them in his first ever potions lesson? A stone taken from the stomach of a goat, which will protect from most poisons. It was not an answer to the Gulpalot problem, and had Snape still been their teacher, Harry would not have dared do it. But this was a moment for desperate measures. He hastened toward the store cupboard and rummaged within it, pushing aside unicorn horns and tangled, dried herbs, until he found at the very back a small cardboard box on which had been scribbled the word Bezoars. He opened the box just as Slughorn called, 2 minutes left, everyone! Inside were a half-dozen shriveled brown objects, looking more like dried-up kidneys than real stones. Harry seized one, put the box back in the cupboard, and hurried back to his cauldron. Time's up, called Slughorn genially. Well, let's see how you've done. Blaise, what have you got for me? Slowly, Slughorn moved around the room, examining the various antidotes. Nobody had finished the task, although Hermione was trying to cram a few more ingredients into her bottle before Slughorn reached her. Ron had given up completely and was merely trying to avoid breathing in the putrid fumes issuing from his cauldron. Harry stood there waiting, the Bezoar clutched in a slightly sweaty hand. Slughorn reached their table last. He sniffed Ernie's potion and passed on to Ron's with a grimace. He did not linger over Ron's cauldron, but backed away swiftly, retching slightly. And you, Harry, he said, what have you got to show me? Harry held out his hand, the Bezoar sitting on his palm. Slughorn looked down at it for a full 10 seconds. Harry wondered for a moment whether he was going to shout at him. Then he threw back his head and roared with laughter. You've got nerve, boy, he boomed, taking the Bezoar and holding it up so that the class could see. Oh, you're like your mother! Well, I can't fault you. A Bezoar would certainly act as an antidote to all these potions. Hermione, who was sweaty-faced and had soot on her nose, looked livid. Her half-finished antidote, comprising 52 ingredients, including a chunk of her own hair, bubbled sluggishly behind Slughorn, who had eyes for nobody but Harry. And you thought of a Bezoar all of yourself, did you, Harry? She asked through gritted teeth. That's the individual spirit a real potion maker needs, said Slughorn happily before Harry could reply. Just like his mother, she had the same intuitive grasp of potion making. It's undoubtedly from Lily he gets it. Yes, Harry, yes. If you've got a Bezoar to hand, of course, that would do the trick. Although, as they don't work on everything, and are pretty rare, it's still worth knowing how to mix antidotes. The only person in the room looking angrier than Hermione was Malfoy, who Harry was pleased to see had spilled something that looked like cat sick over himself. Before either of them could express their fury that Harry had come top of the class by not doing any work, however, the bell rang. Time to pack up, said Slughorn, and an extra 10 points to Gryffindor for sheer cheek. Still chuckling, he waddled back to his desk at the front of the dungeon. Harry dawdled behind, taking an inordinate amount of time to do up his bag. Neither Ron nor Hermione wished him luck as they left. Both looked rather annoyed. At last, Harry and Slughorn were the only two left in the room. Oh, come on now, Harry, you'll be late for your next lesson, said Slughorn affably, snapping the gold clasps shut on his dragon skin briefcase. Sir, said Harry, reminding himself irresistibly of Voldemort, I wanted to ask you something. Ask away then, my dear boy, ask away. Sir, I wondered what you know about Horcruxes. Slughorn froze. His round face seemed to sink in upon itself. He licked his lips and said hoarsely, What did you say? I asked whether you know anything about Horcruxes, sir. You see... Dumbledore put you up to this, whispered Slughorn. His voice had changed completely. It was not genial anymore, but shocked, terrified. He fumbled in his breast pocket and pulled out a handkerchief, mopping his sweaty brow. Dumbledore's shown you that memory. Well, hasn't he? Yes, said Harry, deciding on the spot that it was best not to lie. Yes, of course, said Slughorn quietly, still dabbing at his white face. Of course, well, if you've seen that memory, Harry, you'll know that I don't know anything, he repeated the word forcefully, about Horcruxes. He seized his dragon skin briefcase, stuffed his handkerchief back into his pocket, and marched to the dungeon door. Sir, said Harry desperately, I just thought there might be a bit more to the memory. Did you? Said Slughorn. Then you were wrong, weren't you? Wrong! He bellowed the last word, and before Harry could say another word, slammed the dungeon door behind him. Neither Ron nor Hermione was at all sympathetic when Harry told them of this disastrous interview. Hermione was still seething at the way Harry had triumphed without doing the work properly. Ron was resentful that Harry hadn't slipped him a Bezoar too. It would have just looked stupid if we'd both done it, said Harry irritably. Look, I had to try and soften him up so I could ask him about Voldemort, didn't I? Oh, will you get a grip? He added in exasperation as Ron winced at the sound of the name. Infuriated by his failure and by Ron's and Hermione's attitudes, Harry brooded for the next few days over what to do next about Slughorn. He decided that, for the time being, he would let Slughorn think that he had forgotten all about Horcruxes. It was surely best to lull him into a false sense of security before returning to the attack. When Harry did not question Slughorn again, the potions master reverted to his usual affectionate treatment of him and appeared to have put the matter from his mind. Harry awaited an invitation to one of his little evening parties, determined to accept this time, even if he had to reschedule Quidditch practice. Unfortunately, however, no such invitation arrived. Harry checked with Hermione and Ginny. Neither of them had received an invitation and, nor, as far as they knew, had anybody else. Harry could not help wondering whether this meant that Slughorn was not quite as forgetful as he appeared, simply determined to give Harry no additional opportunities to question him. Meanwhile, the Hogwarts library had failed Hermione for the first time in living memory. She was so shocked she even forgot that she was annoyed at Harry for his trick with the Bezoar. I haven't found one single explanation of what Horcruxes do, she told him. Not a single one. I've been right about through the restricted section and even in the most horrible books where they tell you to brew the most gruesome potions. Nothing. All I could find was this in the introduction to Magic Most Evil. Listen, of the Horcrux, wickedest of magical inventions, we shall not speak nor give direction. I mean, why mention it then? She said impatiently, slamming the old book shut. It let out a ghostly wail. Oh, shut up! She snapped, stuffing it back into her bag. The snow melted around the school as February arrived, to be replaced by cold, dreary wetness. Purplish gray clouds hung low over the castle, and a constant fall of chilly rain made the lawns slippery and muddy. The upshot of this was that the 6th year's first apparition lesson, which was scheduled for a Saturday morning so that no normal lessons would be missed, took place in the Great Hall instead of in the grounds. When Harry and Hermione arrived in the hall, Ron had come down with Lavender. They found that the tables had disappeared. Rain lashed against the high windows, and the enchanted ceiling swirled darkly above them as they assembled in front of the professors McGonagall, Snape, Flitwick, and Sprout, the heads of houses, and a small wizard whom Harry took to be the apparition instructor for the ministry. He was oddly colorless, with transparent eyelashes, wispy hair, and an insubstantial air, as though a single gust of wind might blow him away. Harry wondered whether constant disappearances and reappearances had somehow diminished his substance, or whether this frail build was ideal for anyone wishing to vanish. Good morning, said the ministry wizard when all the students had arrived and the head of houses had called for quiet. My name is Wilkie Twycross, and I shall be your ministry apparition instructor for the next 12 weeks. I hope to be able to prepare you for your apparition tests in this time. Malfoy, be quiet and pay attention, barked Professor McGonagall. Everybody looked around. Malfoy had flushed a dull pink. He looked furious as he stepped away from Crabbe, with whom he had appeared to be having a whispered argument. Harry glanced quickly at Snape, who also looked annoyed, though Harry strongly suspected that this was less because of Malfoy's rudeness than the fact that McGonagall had reprimanded one of his house. By which time many of you may be ready to take your tests, Twycross continued, as though there had been no interruption. As you may know, it is usually impossible to apparate or disapparate within Hogwarts. The headmaster has lifted this enchantment purely within the Great Hall for 1 hour, so as to enable you to practice. May I emphasize that you will not be able to apparate outside the walls of this hall, and that you would be unwise to try. I would like each of you to place yourselves now so that you have a clear 5 feet of space in front of you. There's a great scrambling and jostling as people separated, banging into each other and ordering others out of their space. The heads of houses moved among the students, marshalling them into position and breaking up arguments. Harry, where are you going? Demanded Hermione, but Harry did not answer. He was moving quickly through the crowd, past the place where Professor Flitwick was making squeaky attempts to position a few Ravenclaws, all of whom wanted to be near the front, past Professor Sprout, who was chivying the Hufflepuffs into line, until, by dodging around Ernie Macmillan, he managed to position himself right at the back of the crowd, directly behind Malfoy, who was taking advantage of the general upheaval to continue his argument with Crabbe, standing 5 feet away and looking mutinous. "I don't know how much longer, all right?" Malfoy shot at him, oblivious to Harry standing right behind him. "It's taking longer than I thought it would." Crabbe opened his mouth, but Malfoy appeared to second-guess what he was going to say. "Look, it's none of your business what I'm doing, Crabbe. You and Goyle just do as you're told and keep a lookout." "I tell my friends what I'm up to, if I want them to keep a lookout for me," Harry said just loud enough for Malfoy to hear him. Malfoy spun around on the spot, his hand flying to his wand. But at that precise moment, the 4 heads of house shouted, "Quiet!" and silence fell again. Malfoy turned slowly to face the front again. "Thank you," said Twycross. "Now then." He waved his wand. Old-fashioned wooden hoops instantly appeared on the floor in front of every student. "The important thing to remember when apparating are the 3 Ds," said Twycross. "Destination, determination, deliberation. Step 1. Fix your mind firmly upon the desired destination," said Twycross. "In this case, the interior of your hoop. Kindly concentrate upon that destination now." Everybody looked around furtively to check that everyone else was staring into their hoop, then hastily did as they were told. Harry gazed at the circular patch of dusty floor enclosed by his hoop and tried hard to think of nothing else. This proved impossible, as he couldn't stop puzzling over what Malfoy was doing that needed lookouts. "Step 2, said Twycross. "Focus your determination to occupy the visualized space. Let your yearning to enter it flood from your mind to every particle of your body." Harry glanced around surreptitiously. A little way to his left, Ernie Macmillan was contemplating his hoop so hard that his face had turned pink. It looked as though he was straining to lay a quaffle-sized egg. Harry bit back a laugh and hastily returned his gaze to his own hoop. "Step 3, called Twycross, "and only when I give the command. Turn on the spot, feeling your way into nothingness, moving with deliberation. On my command now. 1." Harry glanced around again. Lots of people were looking positively alarmed at being asked to apparate so quickly. 2. Harry tried to fix his thoughts on his hoop again. He had already forgotten what the 3 Ds stood for. 3. Harry spun on the spot, lost balance and nearly fell over. He was not the only one. The whole hall was suddenly full of staggering people. Neville was flat on his back. Ernie Macmillan, on the other hand, had done a kind of pirouetting leap into his hoop and looked momentarily thrilled until he caught sight of Dean Thomas roaring with laughter at him. Never mind, said Twycross dryly, who did not seem to have expected anything better. "Adjust your hoops, please, and back to your original positions." The second attempt was no better than the first. The third was just as bad. Not until the fourth did anything exciting happen. There was a horrible screech of pain, and everybody looked around, terrified, to see Susan Bones of Hufflepuff wobbling in her hoop, with her left leg still standing 5 feet away where she had started. The heads of house converged on her. There was a great bang and a puff of purple smoke, which cleared to reveal Susan sobbing, reunited with her leg, but looking horrified. "Splinching, or the separation of random body parts," said Wilkie Twycross dispassionately, "occurs when the mind is insufficiently determined. You must concentrate continuously upon your destination and move without haste, but with deliberation. Thus." Twycross stepped forward, turned gracefully on the spot with his arms outstretched, and vanished in a swirl of robes, reappearing at the back of the hall. "Remember the 3 Ds, he said, "and try again. 1, 2, 3. But an hour later, Susan's splinching was still the most interesting thing that had happened. Twycross did not seem discouraged. Fastening his cloak at his neck, he merely said, "Until next Saturday, everybody, and do not forget, destination, determination, deliberation." With that, he waved his wand, vanishing the hoops, and walked out of the hall accompanied by Professor McGonagall. Talk broke out at once as people began moving toward the entrance hall. "How'd you do?" asked Ron, hurrying toward Harry. "I think I felt something the last time I tried, a kind of tingling in my feet." "I expect your trainers are too small, Wan," said a voice behind them, and Hermione stalked past, smirking. "I didn't feel anything," said Harry, ignoring this interruption. "But I don't care about that now." "What do you mean you don't care? Don't you want to learn to apparate?" said Ron incredulously. "I'm not fussed, really. I prefer flying," said Harry, glancing over his shoulder to see where Malfoy was, and speeding up as they came into the entrance hall. "Look, hurry up, will you? There's something I want to do." Perplexed, Ron followed Harry back to Gryffindor Tower at a run. They were temporarily detained by Peeves, who had jammed a door on the 4th floor shut and was refusing to let anyone pass until they set fire to their own pants. But Harry and Ron simply turned back and took one of their trusted shortcuts. Within 5 minutes, they were climbing through the portrait hole. "Are you going to tell me what we're doing then?" asked Ron, panting slightly. "Up here," said Harry, and he crossed the common room and led the way up the door to the boys' staircase. Their dormitory was, as Harry had hoped, empty. He flung open his trunk and began to rummage in it, while Ron watched impatiently. "Harry, Malfoy's using Crabbe and Goyle as lookouts. He was arguing with Crabbe just now. I want to know—" Aha! He had found it, a folded square of apparently blank parchment, which he now smoothed out and tapped with the tip of his wand. "I solemnly swear that I am up to no good. Or Malfoy is, anyway." At once the Marauder's map appeared on the parchment's surface. Here was a detailed plan of every one of the castle's floors, and moving around it, the tiny labeled black dots that signified each of the castle's occupants. "Help me find Malfoy," said Harry urgently. He laid the map upon his bed, and he and Ron leaned over it, searching. "There," said Ron after a minute or so. "He's in the Slytherin common room. Look, with Parkinson and Zabini and Crabbe and Goyle." Harry looked down at the map, disappointed, but rallied almost at once. "Well, I'm keeping an eye on him from now on," he said firmly. "And the moment I see him lurking somewhere with Crabbe and Goyle, keeping watch outside, it'll be on with the old invisibility cloak and off to find out what he's—" He broke off as Neville entered the dormitory, bringing with him a strong smell of singed material, and began rummaging in his trunk for a fresh pair of pants. Determined to catch Malfoy out, Harry had no luck at all over the next couple weeks. Although he consulted the map as often as he could, sometimes making unnecessary visits to the bathroom between lessons to search it, he did not see once Malfoy anywhere suspicious. Admittedly, he spotted Crabbe and Goyle moving around the castle on their own more often than usual, sometimes remaining stationary in deserted corridors. But at these times, Malfoy was not only nowhere near them, but impossible to locate on the map at all. This was most mysterious. Harry toyed with the possibility that Malfoy was actually leaving the school, but could not see how he could be doing it given the very high level of security now operating within the castle. He could only suppose that he was missing Malfoy amongst the hundreds of tiny black dots upon the map. As for the fact that Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle appeared to be going their different ways when they were usually inseparable, these things happened as people got older. Ron and Hermione, Harry reflected sadly, were living proof. February moved toward March, with no change in the weather except that it became windy and wet as well. To general indignation, a sign went up on all common room notice boards that the next trip into Hogsmeade had been cancelled. Ron was furious. "It was on my birthday," he said. "I was looking forward to that." "Not a big surprise, though, is it?" said Harry. "Not after what happened to Katie." She had still not returned from St. Mungo's. What was more, further disappearances had been reported in the Daily Prophet, including several relatives of students at Hogwarts. "But now all I've got to look forward to is stupid apparition," said Ron grumpily. "Big birthday treat." 3 lessons on, apparition was proving as difficult as ever, though a few more people had managed to splinch themselves. Frustration was running high, and there was a certain amount of ill feeling toward Wilkie Twycross in his 3 Ds, which had inspired a number of nicknames for him, the politest of which were Dog Breath and Dunghead. "Happy birthday, Ron," said Harry when they were woken on the 1st of March by Seamus and Dean leaving noisily for breakfast. "Have a present." He threw the package across onto Ron's bed, where it joined a small pile of them that must, Harry assumed, have been delivered by house elves in the night. "Cheers," said Ron drowsily, and as he ripped off the paper, Harry got out of bed, opened his own trunk, and began rummaging in it for the Marauder's map, which he hid after every use. He turfed out half the contents of his trunk before he found it hiding beneath the rolled-up socks, in which he was still keeping his bottle of lucky potion, Felix Felicis. "Right," he murmured, taking it back to bed with him, tapping it quietly and murmuring, "I solemnly swear that I'm up to no good," so that Neville, who was passing the foot of his bed at the time, would not hear. "Nice one, Harry," said Ron enthusiastically, waving the new pair of Quidditch keeper's gloves Harry had given him. "No problem," said Harry absent-mindedly, as he searched the Slytherin dormitory closely for Malfoy. "Hey, I don't think he's in his bed." Ron did not answer. He was too busy unwrapping presents, every now and then letting out an exclamation of pleasure. "Seriously good haul this year," he announced, holding up a heavy gold watch with odd symbols around the edge and tiny moving stars instead of hands. "See what Mum and Dad got me? Blimey, I think I'll come of age next year, too." "Cool," muttered Harry, sparing the watch a glance before peering more closely at the map. Where was Malfoy? He did not seem to be at the Slytherin table in the Great Hall eating breakfast. He was nowhere near Snape, who was sitting in his study. He wasn't in any of the bathrooms or in the hospital wing. "Want one?" said Ron thickly, holding out a box of chocolate cauldrons. No thanks," said Harry, looking up. "Malfoy's gone again." "Can't have done," said Ron, stuffing a second cauldron into his mouth as he slid out of bed to get dressed. Come on. If you don't hurry up, you'll have to operate on an empty stomach. Might make it easier, I suppose. Ron looked thoughtfully at the box of chocolate cauldrons, then shrugged and helped himself to a third. Harry tapped the map with his wand, muttered, "Mischief managed," though it hadn't been, and got dressed thinking hard. There had to be an explanation for Malfoy's periodic disappearances, but he simply could not think of what it could be. The best way of finding out would be to tail him, but even with the invisibility cloak, this was an impractical idea. Harry had lessons, Quidditch practice, homework, and apparition. He could not follow Malfoy around the school all day without his absence being remarked upon. "Ready?" he said to Ron. He was halfway to the dormitory door when he realized that Ron had not moved, but was leaning on his bedpost, staring out of the rain-washed window with a strangely unfocused look on his face. "Ron? Breakfast?" "I'm not hungry." Harry stared at him. I thought you just said..." "Well, all right, I'll come down with you," sighed Ron. "But I don't want to eat." Harry scrutinized him suspiciously. "You've just eaten half a box of chocolate cauldrons, haven't you?" "It's not that." Ron sighed again. You wouldn't understand." "Fair enough," said Harry, albeit puzzled as he turned to open the door. "Harry!" said Ron suddenly. "What?" "Harry, I can't stand it!" "You can't stand what?" asked Harry, now starting to feel definitely alarmed. Ron was rather pale and looked as though he was about to be sick. "I can't stop thinking about her," said Ron hoarsely. Harry gaped at him. He had not expected this and was not sure he wanted to hear it. Friends they might be, but if Ron started calling Lavender Lav-Lav, he would have to put his foot down. "Why does that stop you having breakfast?" Harry asked, trying to inject a note of common sense into the proceedings. "I don't think she knows I exist," said Ron with a desperate gesture. "She definitely knows you exist," said Harry, bewildered. "She keeps snogging you, doesn't she?" Ron blinked. "Who are you talking about?" "Who are you talking about?" said Harry with an increasing sense that all reason had dropped out of this conversation. "Romilda Vane," said Ron softly, and his whole face seemed to illuminate as he said it, as though hit by a ray of purest sunlight. They stared at each other for almost a whole minute before Harry said, "This is a joke, right? You're joking." Harry, I think I'm in love with her," said Ron in a strangled voice. "Okay," said Harry, walking up to Ron to get a better look at the glazed eyes and the pallid complexion. "Okay, say that again with a straight face." "I love her," repeated Ron breathlessly. "Have you seen her hair? It's all black and shiny and silky. And her eyes, her big dark eyes, and her..." "This is really funny and everything," said Harry impatiently. "But joke's over, all right? Drop it." He turned to leave. He got 2 steps toward the door when a crashing blow hit him on the right ear. Staggering, he looked around. Ron's fist was drawn right back. His face was contorted with rage. He was about to strike again. Harry reacted instinctively. His wand out of his pocket, and the incantation sprang to mind without conscious thought. "Levicorpus!" Ron yelled as his heel was wrenched upward once more. He dangled helplessly upside down, his robes hanging off him. "What was that for?" Harry bellowed. "You insulted her, Harry! You said it was a joke!" shouted Ron, who was slowly turning purple in the face as all the blood rushed to his head. "This is insane!" said Harry. "What's got into you?" And then he saw the box lying open on Ron's bed, and the truth hit him with the force of a stampeding troll. "Where'd you get those chocolate cauldrons?" "They were a birthday present!" shouted Ron, revolving slowly in midair as he struggled to get free. "I offered you one, didn't I?" "You just picked them up off the floor, didn't you?" "They'd fallen off my bed, all right? Let me go!" "They didn't fall off your bed, you prat! Don't you understand? They were mine! I chucked them out of my trunk when I was looking for the map. They're the chocolate cauldrons Romilda Vane gave me before Christmas, and they're all spiked with love potion." But only one word of this seemed to have registered with Ron. "Romilda?" he repeated. "Did you say Romilda? Harry, do you know her? Can you introduce me?" Harry stared at the dangling Ron, whose face now looked tremendously hopeful, and fought a strong desire to laugh. A part of him, the part closest to his throbbing right ear, was quite keen on the idea of letting Ron down and watching him run amok until the effects of the potion wore off. But on the other hand, they were supposed to be friends. Ron had not been himself when he had attacked, and Harry thought he would deserve another punching if he permitted Ron to declare undying love for Romilda Vane. "Yeah, I'll introduce you," said Harry, thinking fast. "I'm going to let you down now, okay?" He sent Ron crashing back to the floor. His ear did hurt quite a lot, but Ron simply bounded to his feet again, grinning. "She'll be in Slughorn's office," said Harry confidently, leading the way to the door. "Why will she be in there?" asked Ron anxiously, hurrying to keep up. "Oh, she has extra potion lessons with him," said Harry, inventing wildly. Maybe I could ask if I can have them with her, said Ron eagerly. Yeah, great idea, said Harry. Lavender was waiting beside the portrait hole, a complication Harry had not foreseen. You late, Wan-Wan? She pouted. I've got you a birthday. Leave me alone, said Ron impatiently. Harry's going to introduce me to Romilda Vane. And without another word to her, he pushed his way out of the portrait hole. Harry tried to make an apologetic face to Lavender, but it might have turned out simply amused because she looked more offended than ever as the fat lady swung shut behind them. Harry had been slightly worried that Slughorn might be at breakfast, but he answered his office door at the first knock wearing a green velvet dressing gown and matching nightcap and looking rather bleary-eyed. Harry, he mumbled, this is very early for a call. I generally sleep late on a Saturday. Professor, I'm really sorry to disturb you, said Harry as quietly as possible while Ron stood on tiptoe, attempting to see past Slughorn into his room. But my friend Ron's swallowed a love potion by mistake. You couldn't make him an antidote, could you? I'd take him to Madame Pomfrey, but we're not supposed to have anything from Weasley's Wizard Wheezes and, awkward questions. I'd have thought you could have whipped him up a remedy, Harry, an expert potioneer like you, asked Slughorn. Said Harry, somewhat distracted by the fact that Ron was now elbowing him in the ribs in an attempt to force his way into the room. Well, I've never mixed an antidote for a love potion, sir, and by the time I get it right, Ron might have done something serious. Helpfully, Ron chose this moment to moan. Oh, I can't see her, Harry. Is he hiding her? Was this potion within date? Asked Slughorn, now eyeing Ron with professional interest. They can strengthen, the longer they're kept. That would explain a lot, panted Harry, now positively wrestling with Ron to keep him from knocking Slughorn over. It's his birthday, Professor, he added imploringly. Oh, all right then, come in, said Slughorn, relenting. I've got the necessary here in my bag. It's not a difficult antidote. Ron burst through the door into Slughorn's overheated, crowded study, tripped over a tasseled footstool, regained his balance by seizing Harry around the neck, and muttered, She didn't see that, did she? She's not here yet, said Harry, watching Slughorn opening his potions kit and adding a few pinches of this and that to a small crystal bottle. That's good, said Ron fervently. How do I look? Very handsome, said Slughorn smoothly, handing Ron a glass of clear liquid. Now, drink that up. It's a tonic for the nerves. Keep you calm when she arrives, Brilliant, said Ron eagerly, and he gulped the antidote down noisily. Harry and Slughorn watched him. For a moment, Ron beamed at them. Then, very slowly, his grin sagged and vanished, to be replaced by an expression of utmost horror. Back to normal, then? Said Harry, grinning. Slughorn chuckled. Thanks a lot, Professor. Don't mention it, my boy, don't mention it, said Slughorn as Ron collapsed into a nearby armchair, looking devastated. Pick me up, that's what he needs. Slughorn continued, now bustling over to a table loaded with drinks. I've got butterbeer, I've got wine, I've got one last bottle of this oak-matured mead. Meant to give that to Dumbledore for Christmas. Ah, well, he shrugged. He can't miss what he's never had. Why don't we open it now and celebrate Mr. Weasley's birthday? Nothing like a fine spirit to chase away the pangs of disappointed love. He chortled again, and Harry joined in. This was the first time he had found himself almost alone with Slughorn since his disastrous first attempt to extract the true memory from him. Perhaps, if you could just keep Slughorn in a good mood. Perhaps if they got through enough of the oak-matured mead. There you are, then, said Slughorn, handing Harry and Ron a glass of mead each before raising his own. Well, a very happy birthday, Ralph. Ron, whispered Harry. But Ron, who did not appear to be listening to the toast, had already thrown the mead into his mouth and swallowed it. There was 1 second, hardly more than a heartbeat, in which Harry knew there was something terribly wrong, and Slughorn, it seemed, did not. And may you have many more! Ron! Ron had dropped his glass. He half rose from his chair and then crumpled, his extremities jerking uncontrollably. Foam was dribbling from his mouth, and his eyes were bulging from their sockets. Professor! Harry bellowed. Do something! But Slughorn seemed paralyzed by shock. Ron twitched and choked. His skin was turning blue. What? But... spluttered Slughorn. Harry leapt over a low table and sprinted towards Slughorn's open potion kit, pulling out jars and pouches, while the terrible sound of Ron's gargling breath filled the room. Then he found it, the shriveled, kidney-like stone Slughorn had taken from him in potions. He hurtled back to Ron's side, wrenched open his jaw, and thrust the bezoar into his mouth. Ron gave a great shudder, a rattling gasp, and his body became limp and still. Chapter 19. Elf Tales. So, all in all, not one of Ron's better birthdays, said Fred. It was evening. The hospital wing was quiet, the windows curtained, the lamps lit. Ron's was the only occupied bed. Harry, Hermione, and Ginny were sitting around him. They had spent all day waiting outside the double doors, trying to see inside whenever somebody went in or out. Madame Pomfrey had only let them enter at 8 o'clock. Fred and George had arrived at 10 past. "This isn't how we imagined handing over our present," said George grimly, putting down a large wrapped gift on Ron's bedside cabinet and sitting beside Ginny. "Yeah, when we pictured the scene, he was conscious," said Fred. "There we were in Hogsmeade, waiting to surprise him," said George. "You were in Hogsmeade?" asked Ginny, looking up. "We were thinking of buying Zonkos," said Fred gloomily. "A Hogsmeade branch, you know, but a fat lot of good that'll do us, if you lot aren't allowed at weekends to buy our stuff anymore. But, never mind that now." He drew up a chair beside Harry and looked at Ron's pale face. "How exactly did it happen, Harry?" Harry retold the story he had already recounted. It felt like 100 times, to Dumbledore, to McGonagall, to Madame Pomfrey, to Hermione, and to Ginny. "And then I got the Bezoar down his throat and his breathing eased up a bit. Slughorn ran for help, McGonagall and Madame Pomfrey turned up, and they brought Ron up here. They reckon he'll be all right. Madame Pomfrey says he'll have to stay here a week or so, keep taking essence of rue." "Blimey, it was lucky you thought of a Bezoar," said George in a low voice. "Lucky there was one in the room," said Harry, who kept turning cold at the thought of what would have happened if he had not been able to lay hands on the little stone. Hermione gave an almost inaudible sniff. She had been exceptionally quiet all day, having hurtled white-faced up to Harry outside the hospital wing and demanded to know what had happened. She had taken almost no part in Harry and Ginny's obsessive discussion about how Ron had been poisoned, but merely stood beside them, clenched-jawed and frightened-looking, until at last they had been allowed in to see him. "Do Mum and Dad know?" Fred asked Ginny. "They've already been to see him. They arrived about an hour ago. They're in Dumbledore's office now, but they'll be back soon." There was a pause while they all watched Ron mumble a little in his sleep. "So the poison was in the drink," said Fred quietly. "Yes," said Harry at once. He could think of nothing else and was glad for the opportunity to start discussing it again. Slughorn poured it out. "Would he have been able to slip something into Ron's glass without you seeing?" "Probably," said Harry. "But why would Slughorn want to poison Ron?" "No idea," said Fred, frowning. "You don't think he could have mixed up the glasses by mistake, meaning to get you?" "Why would Slughorn want to poison Harry?" asked Ginny. "I don't know," said Fred. "But there must be loads of people who'd like to poison Harry, mustn't there? The Chosen One and all that." "So you think Slughorn's a Death Eater?" said Ginny. "Anything's possible," said Fred darkly. "He could be under the Imperious Curse," said George. "Or he could be innocent," said Ginny. "The poison could have been in the bottle, in which case it was probably meant for Slughorn himself." "Who would want to kill Slughorn?" "Dumbledore reckons Voldemort wanted Slughorn on his side," said Harry. "Slughorn was in hiding for a year before he came to Hogwarts, and he thought of the memory Dumbledore had not yet been able to extract from Slughorn. And maybe Voldemort wants him out of the way. Maybe he thinks he could be valuable to Dumbledore." "But you said Slughorn had been planning to give that bottle to Dumbledore for Christmas," Ginny reminded him. "So the poisoner could just have easily have been after Dumbledore." "So then the poison didn't know Slughorn very well," said Hermione, speaking for the first time in hours and sounding as though she had a bad head cold. "Anyone who knew Slughorn would have known there was a good chance he'd keep something that tasty for himself." "Hermione," croaked Ron unexpectedly from between them. They all fell silent, watching him anxiously, but after muttering incomprehensibly for a moment, he merely started snoring. The dormitory doors flew open, making them all jump. Hagrid came striding toward them, his hair rain-flecked, his bearskin coat flapping behind him, a crossbow in his hand, leaving a trail of muddy, dolphin-sized footprints all over the floor. "Been in the forest all day," he panted. "Aragog's worse. I've been reading to him. Didn't go up till dinner just now. Then Professor Sprout told me about Ron. How is he?" "Not bad," said Harry. "They say he'll be okay." "No more than 6 visitors at a time," said Madame Pomfrey, hurrying out of her office. "Hagrid makes 6, George pointed out. "Oh, yes," said Madame Pomfrey, who seemed to have been counting Hagrid as several people do his vastness. To cover her confusion, she hurried off to clear up his muddy footprints with her wand. "I don't believe this," said Hagrid hoarsely, shaking his great shaggy head as he stared down at Ron. "Just don't believe it. Look at him lying there. Who'd want to hurt him, eh?" "That's just what we were discussing," said Harry. "We don't know." "Someone couldn't have a grudge against the Gryffindor Quidditch team, could they?" said Hagrid anxiously. "First Katie, now Ron." "I can't see anyone trying to bump off a Quidditch team," said George. "Wood might have done the Slytherins if he could have got away with it," said Fred fairly. Well, I don't think it's Quidditch, but I think there's a connection between the attacks, said Hermione quietly. How do you work that one out? Asked Fred. Well, for one thing, they both ought to have been fatal, and weren't, although that was pure luck. And for another, neither the poison nor the necklace seems to have reached the person who was supposed to be killed. Of course, she added broodingly, that makes the person behind this even more dangerous in a way, because they don't seem to care how many people they finish off before they actually reach their victim. Before anybody could respond to this ominous pronouncement, the dormitory doors opened again, and Mr. and Mrs. Weasley hurried up the ward. They had done no more than satisfy themselves that Ron would make a full recovery on their last visit to the ward. Now Mrs. Weasley seized hold of Harry and hugged him very tightly. Dumbledore's told us how you saved him with the Bezoar, she sobbed. Oh, Harry, what can we say? You saved Ginny. You saved Arthur. Now you saved Ron. Don't we... I didn't, muttered Harry awkwardly. Half our family does seem to owe you their lives. Now I stop and think about it, Mr. Weasley said in a constricted voice. Well, all I can say is that it was a lucky day for the Weasleys when Ron decided to sit in your compartment on the Hogwarts Express, Harry. Harry could not think of any reply to this, and was almost glad when Madame Pomfrey reminded them that there were only supposed to be 6 visitors around Ron's bed. He and Hermione rose at once to leave, and Hagrid decided to go with them, leaving Ron with his family. It's terrible, growled Hagrid into his beard as the 3 of them walked back along the corridor to the marble staircase. All this new security and kids are still getting hurt. Dumbledore's worried sick. He don't say much, but I can tell. Hasn't he got any ideas, Hagrid? Asked Hermione desperately. I expect he's got hundreds of ideas, brains like his, said Hagrid. But he doesn't know who sent that necklace nor put poison in that wine, or they'd have been caught, wouldn't they? What worries me, said Hagrid, lowering his voice and glancing over his shoulder. Harry, for good measure, checked the ceiling for Peeves. Is how long Hogwarts can stay open if kids are being attacked. Chamber of Secrets all over again, isn't it? There'll be panic, more parents taking their kids out of school, and next thing you know, the Board of Governors... Hagrid stopped talking as the ghost of a long-haired woman drifted serenely past, then resumed in a hoarse whisper. The Board of Governors will be talking about shutting us up for good. Surely not, said Hermione, looking worried. Gotta see from their point of view, said Hagrid heavily. I mean, it's always been a bit of a risk sending a kid to Hogwarts, hasn't it? You expect accidents, don't you? With hundreds of underage wizards all locked up together, but attempted murder, that's different. It's no wonder Dumbledore's angry with Snape. Hagrid stopped in his tracks. A familiar guilty expression on what was his visible face above his tangled black beard appeared. What? Said Harry quickly. Dumbledore's angry with Snape? I never said that, said Hagrid, though his look of panic could not have been a bigger giveaway. Look at the time, it's getting on for midnight, I need to... Hagrid, why is Dumbledore angry with Snape? Harry asked loudly. Shh, said Hagrid, looking both nervous and angry. Don't shout stuff like that, Harry. Do you want me to lose my job? Mind, I don't suppose you'd care, would you? Now that you've given up care of Matt... Don't try and make me feel guilty. It won't work, said Harry forcefully. What's Snape done? I don't know, Harry. I shouldn't have heard it at all. I was coming out of the forest the other evening, and I overheard him talking. Well, arguing. Didn't like to draw attention to myself, so I sort of skulked and tried not to listen, but it was a heated discussion, and it wasn't easy to block out. Well, Harry urged him as Hagrid shuffled his enormous feet uneasily. Well, I just heard Snape saying Dumbledore took too much for granted, and maybe he, Snape, didn't want to do it anymore. Do what? I don't know, Harry. It sounded like Snape was feeling a bit overworked, that's all. Anyway, Dumbledore told him flat out, and he'd agreed to do it, and that was all there was to it. Pretty firm with him. And then he said something about Snape making investigation in his house in Slytherin. Well, there's nothing strange about that, Hagrid added hastily as Harry and Hermione exchanged looks full of meaning. All the heads of houses were asked to look into that necklace business. Yeah, but Dumbledore's not having rows with the rest of them, is he? Said Harry. Look. Hagrid twisted his crossbow uncomfortably in his hands. There was a loud splintering sound as it snapped in two. I know what you're like about Snape, Harry, and I don't want you to go reading more into this than there is. Look out, said Hermione tersely. They turned just in time to see the shadow of Argus Filch looming over the wall behind them before the man himself turned the corner, hunchbacked, his jowls a-quiver. Oh, he wheezed. Out of bed so late? This'll mean detention. No, it won't, Filch, said Hagrid shortly. They're with me, aren't they? And what difference does that make? Asked Filch obnoxiously. I'm a ready teacher, aren't I, you sneaking squib? Said Hagrid, firing up at once. There was a nasty hissing noise as Filch swelled with fury. Mrs. Norris had arrived unseen and was twisting herself sinuously around Filch's skinny ankles. "Get going," said Hagrid out of the corner of his mouth. Harry did not need telling twice. He and Hermione both hurried off. Hagrid's and Filch's raised voices echoed behind them as they ran. They passed Peeves near the turning into Gryffindor Tower, but he was streaking happily toward the source of the yelling, cackling and calling, "Where there's strife and when there's trouble, call on Peevesy, he'll make double." The fat lady was snoozing and not pleased to be woken, but swung forward grumpily to allow them to clamber into the mercifully peaceful and empty common room. It did not seem that people knew about Ron yet. Harry was relieved. He had been interrogated enough that day. Hermione bade him good night and set off for the girls' dormitory. Harry, however, remained behind, taking a seat beside the fire and looking down into the dying embers. So, Dumbledore had argued with Snape. In spite of all he had told Harry, in spite of his insistence that he trusted Snape completely, he had lost his temper with him. He did not think that Snape had tried hard enough to investigate the Slytherins, or perhaps to investigate a single Slytherin? Malfoy? Was it because Dumbledore did not want Harry to do anything foolish, to take matters into his own hands, that he had pretended there was nothing in Harry's suspicions? That seemed likely. It might even be that Dumbledore did not want anything to distract Harry from their lessons, or from procuring that memory from Slughorn. Perhaps Dumbledore did not think it right to confide suspicions about his staff to 16-year-olds. "There you are, Potter!" Harry jumped to his feet in shock, his wand at the ready. He had been quite convinced that the common room was empty. He had not been at all prepared for a hulking figure to rise suddenly out of a distant chair. A closer look showed him that it was Cormac McLaggen. "I've been waiting for you to come back," said McLaggen, disregarding Harry's drawn wand. "I must have fallen asleep. Look, I saw them taking Weasley up to the hospital wing earlier. Didn't look like he'll be fit for next week's match." It took Harry a few moments to realize what McLaggen was talking about. "Oh, right, Quidditch," he said, putting his wand back into the belt of his jeans and running a hand wearily through his hair. "Yeah, he might not make it." "Well then, I'll be playing keeper, won't I?" said McLaggen. "Yeah," said Harry. "Yeah, I suppose so." He could not think of an argument against it. After all, McLaggen had certainly performed second best in the trials. "Excellent," said McLaggen in a satisfied voice. "So, when's practice?" "What? Oh, there's one tomorrow evening." "Good. Listen, Potter, we should have a talk beforehand. I've got some ideas on strategy you might find useful." "Right," said Harry unenthusiastically. "Well, I'll hear them tomorrow then. I'm pretty tired now. See you." The news that Ron had been poisoned spread quickly the next day, but it did not cause the sensation that Katie's attack had done. People seemed to think that it might have been an accident, given that he had been in the potion master's room at the time, and that as he had given an antidote immediately, there was no real harm done. In fact, the Gryffindors were generally much more interested in the upcoming Quidditch match against Hufflepuff, for many of them wanted to see Zacharias Smith, who played Chaser on the Hufflepuff team, punished soundly for his commentary during the opening match against Slytherin. Harry, however, had never been less interested in Quidditch. He was rapidly becoming obsessed with Draco Malfoy. Still checking the Marauders map whenever he got a chance, he sometimes made detours to wherever Malfoy happened to be, but had not yet detected him doing anything out of the ordinary. And still there were those inexplicable times when Malfoy simply vanished from the map. But Harry did not get a lot of time to consider the problem. What with Quidditch practice, homework, and the fact that he was now being dogged wherever he went by Cormac McLaggen and Lavender Brown. He could not decide which of them was more annoying. McLaggen kept up a constant stream of hints that he would make a better permanent keeper for the team than Ron, and that now that Harry was seeing him play regularly, he would surely come around to this way of thinking too. He was also keen to criticize the other players and provide Harry with detailed training schemes, so that more than once Harry was forced to remind him who was captain. Meanwhile, Lavender kept sidling up to Harry to discuss Ron, which Harry found almost more wearing than McLaggen's Quidditch lectures. At first, Lavender had been very annoyed that nobody had thought to tell her that Ron was in the hospital wing. I'm his girlfriend. But unfortunately, she had now decided to forgive Harry this lapse of memory, and was keen to have lots of in-depth chats with him about Ron's feelings. A most uncomfortable experience that Harry would have happily forgone. "Look, why don't you talk to Ron about all this?" Harry asked after a particularly long interrogation from Lavender that took in everything from precisely what Ron had said about her new dress robes to whether or not Harry thought that Ron considered his relationship with Lavender to be serious. "Well, I would, but he's always asleep when I go and see him," said Lavender fretfully. "Is he?" said Harry, surprised, for he had found Ron perfectly alert every time he had been up to the hospital wing, both highly interested in the news of Dumbledore and Snape's row, and keen to abuse McLaggen as much as possible. Is Hermione Granger still visiting him? Lavender demanded suddenly. Yeah, I think so. Well, they're friends, aren't they? Said Harry uncomfortably. Friends, don't make me laugh, said Lavender scornfully. She didn't talk to him for weeks after he started going out with me. But I suppose she wants to make up with him now that he's all interesting. Would you call getting poisoned being interesting? Asked Harry. Anyway, sorry, gotta go. There's McLaggen coming for a talk about Quidditch, said Harry hurriedly, and he dashed sideways through a door pretending to be a solid wall and sprinted down the shortcut that would take him off to potions where, thankfully, neither Lavender nor McLaggen could follow him. On the morning of the Quidditch match against Hufflepuff, Harry dropped in on the hospital wing before heading down to the pitch. Ron was very agitated. Madame Pomfrey would not let him go down to watch the match, feeling it would overexcite him. So, how's McLaggen shaping up? He asked Harry nervously, apparently forgetting that he had already asked the same question twice. I've told you, said Harry patiently. He could be a world-class keeper, and I wouldn't want to keep him. He keeps trying to tell everyone what to do. He thinks he could play every position better than the rest of us. I can't wait to be shot of him. And speaking of getting shot at people, Harry added, getting to his feet and picking up his firebolt, will you stop pretending to be asleep when Lavender comes to see you? She's driving me mad as well. Oh, said Ron, looking sheepish. Yeah, all right. If you don't want to go out with her anymore, just tell her, said Harry. Yeah, well, it's not that easy, is it? Said Ron. He paused. Hermione going to look in before the match? He added casually. No, she's already gone down to the pitch with Ginny. Oh, said Ron, looking rather glum. Right, well, good luck. I hope you hammer Smith. I'll try, said Harry, shouldering his broom. See you after the match. He hurried down through the deserted corridors. The whole school was outside, either already seated in the stadium or heading down toward it. He was looking out of the windows he passed, trying to gauge how much wind they were facing, when a noise ahead of him made him glance up, and he saw Malfoy walking toward him, accompanied by two girls, both of whom looked sulky and resentful. Malfoy stopped short at the sight of Harry, then gave a snort and a humorless laugh, and continued walking. Where are you going? Harry demanded. Yeah, I'm really going to tell you, because it's your business, Potter, sneered Malfoy. You better hurry up. They'll be waiting for the chosen captain, the boy who scored, whatever they call you these days. One of the girls gave an unwilling giggle. Harry stared at her. She blushed. Malfoy pushed past Harry, and she and her friend followed at a trot, turning the corner and vanishing from view. Harry stood rooted on the spot and watched them disappear. This was infuriating. He was already cutting it fine to get to the match on time, and yet there was Malfoy, skulking off while the rest of the school was absent. Harry's best chance yet of discovering what Malfoy was up to. The silent seconds trickled past, and Harry remained where he was, frozen, gazing at the place where Malfoy had just vanished. Where have you been? Demanded Ginny as Harry sprinted into the changing rooms. The whole team was changed and ready. Coot and Peakes, the beaters, were both hitting their clubs nervously against their legs. I'm at Malfoy, Harry told her quietly as he pulled his scarlet robes over his head. So I want to know how come he's up at the castle with a couple of girlfriends while everyone else is down here. Does it matter right now? Well, I'm not likely to find out, am I? Said Harry, seizing his firebolt and pushing his glasses straight. Come on, then! And without another word, he marched out onto the pitch to deafening cheers and boos. There was a little wind. The clouds were patchy. Every now and then there were dazzling flashes of brilliant, bright sunlight. Drinking conditions, McLaggen said bracingly to the team. Coot, Peakes, you want to fly out of the sun so they don't see you coming. I'm the captain, McLaggen. Shut up giving them instructions, said Harry angrily. Just get up by the goalposts. Once again, McLaggen had marched off. Harry turned to Coot and Peakes. Make sure you do fly out of the sun, he told them grudgingly. He shook hands with the Hufflepuff captain, and then, on Madame Hooch's whistle, kicked off and rose into the air, higher than the rest of his team, streaking around the pitch in search of the snitch. If he could catch it good and early, there might be a chance he could get back up to the castle, seize the Marauders' map, and find out what Malfoy was doing. And that's Smith of Hufflepuff with the quaffle, said a dreamy voice echoing over the grounds. He did the commentary last time, of course, and Ginny Weasley flew into him. I think probably on purpose. It looked like it. Smith was being quite rude about Gryffindor. I expect he regrets that now that he's playing them. Oh, look, he's lost the quaffle. Ginny took it from him. I do like her. She's very nice. Harry stared down at the commentator's podium. Surely nobody in their right mind would have let Luna Lovegood commentate. But even from above, there was no mistaking that long, dirty blonde hair, nor the necklace of butterbeer corks. Beside Luna, Professor McGonagall was looking slightly uncomfortable, as though she was indeed having second thoughts about this appointment. But now that big Hufflepuff player's got the quaffle from her, I can't remember his name. It's something like Bibble? No, Buggins. It's Cadwallader!" said Professor McGonagall loudly from beside Luna. The crowd laughed. Harry stared around for the snitch. There was no sign of it. Moments later, Cadwallader scored. McLaggen had been shouting criticism at Ginny for allowing the quaffle out of her possession, with the result that he had not noticed the large red ball soaring past his right ear. "McLaggen, will you pay attention to what you're supposed to be doing and leave everyone else alone?" bellowed Harry, wheeling around to face his keeper. "You're not setting a great example," McLaggen shouted back, red-faced and furious. "And now Harry Potter's having an argument with his keeper," said Luna serenely, while both Hufflepuffs and Slytherins below in the crowd cheered and jeered. "I don't think that'll help him find the snitch, but maybe it's a clever ruse." Swearing angrily, Harry spun around and set off around the pitch again, scanning the skies for some sign of the tiny winged golden ball. Ginny and Demelza scored a goal apiece, giving the red and gold-clad supporters below something to cheer about. Then Cadwallader scored again, making things level, but Luna did not seem to have noticed. She appeared singularly uninterested in such mundane things as the score, and kept attempting to draw the crowd's attention to such things as interestingly shaped clouds, and the possibility that Zachariah Smith, who had so far failed to maintain possession of the quaffle for longer than a minute, was suffering from something called loser's lurgy. 70-40 to Hufflepuff! Barked Professor McGonagall into Luna's megaphone. "Is it already?" said Luna vaguely. "Oh, look! The Gryffindor keeper's got hold of one of the beater's bats." Harry spun around in midair. Sure enough, McLaggen, for reasons best known to himself, had pulled Peakes' bat from him and appeared to be demonstrating how to hit a bludger toward an oncoming Cadwallader. "Will you give him back his bat and get to the goalposts?" roared Harry, pelting toward McLaggen, just as McLaggen took a ferocious swipe with the bludger and mishit it. A blinding, sickening pain, a flash of light, distant screams, and the sensation of falling down a long tunnel. And the next thing Harry knew, he was lying in a remarkably warm and comfortable bed, and looking up at a lamp that was throwing a circle of golden light onto a shadowy ceiling. He raised his head awkwardly. There on his left was a familiar-looking, freckly, red-haired person. "Nice of you to drop in," said Ron, grinning. Harry blinked and looked around. Of course, he was in the hospital wing. The sky outside was indigo-streaked with crimson. The match must have finished hours ago, as had any hope of cornering Malfoy. Harry's head felt strangely heavy. He raised a hand and felt a stiff turban of bandages. What happened? "Cracked skull," said Madame Pomfrey, bustling up and pushing him back against his pillows. "Nothing to worry about. I mended it at once, but I'm keeping you in overnight. You shouldn't overexert yourself for a few hours." "I don't want to stay here overnight," said Harry angrily, sitting up and throwing back his covers. "I want to find McLaggen and kill him." "I'm afraid that would come under the heading of overexertion," said Madame Pomfrey, pushing him firmly back onto the bed and raising her wand in a threatening manner. "You will stay here until I discharge you, Potter, or I shall call the headmaster." She bustled back into her office, and Harry sank back into his pillows, fuming. "Do you know how much we lost by?" he asked Ron through clenched teeth. "Well, yeah, I do," said Ron apologetically. "Final score was 320 to 60. "Brilliant," said Harry savagely. "Really brilliant. When I get a hold of McLaggen..." "Oh, you don't want to get a hold of him. He's the size of a troll," said Ron reasonably. "Personally, I think there's a lot to be said for hexing him with that toenail thing of the prince's. Anyway, the rest of the team might have dealt with him before you get out of here. They're not happy." There was a note of badly suppressed glee in Ron's voice. Harry could tell he was nothing short of thrilled that McLaggen had messed up so badly. Harry lay there, staring up the patch of light on the ceiling, his recently mended skull not hurting precisely, but feeling slightly tender underneath all the bandaging. "I could hear the match commentary from here," said Ron, his voice now shaking with laughter. "I hope Luna always commentates from now on. Loser's allergy." But Harry was still too angry to see much humor in the situation, and after a while, Ron's snorts subsided. "Ginny came in to visit while you were unconscious," he said after a long pause, and Harry's imagination zoomed into overdrive, rapidly constructing a scene in which Ginny, weeping over his lifeless form, confessed her feelings of deep attraction to him, while Ron gave them his blessing. "She reckons you only just arrived on time for the match. How come? You left here early enough." "Oh," said Harry, as the scene in his mind's eye imploded. "Yeah, well, I saw Malfoy sneaking off with a couple of girls who didn't look like they wanted to be with him. And that's the second time he's made sure he isn't down on the Quidditch pitch with the rest of the school. He skipped the last match, too, remember?" Harry sighed. "Wish I'd followed him now. The match was such a fiasco." "Don't be stupid," said Ron sharply. "You couldn't have missed a Quidditch match just to follow Malfoy. You're the captain." "I want to know what he's up to," said Harry. "And don't tell me it's all in my head, not for what I overheard between him and Snape. I never said it was all in your head, said Ron, hoisting himself up on an elbow in turn and frowning at Harry. But there's no rule saying only one person at a time can be plotting anything in this place. You're getting a bit obsessed with Malfoy, Harry. I mean, thinking about missing a match just to follow him? I want to catch him at it, said Harry in frustration. I mean, where's he going when he disappears off the map? I don't know. Hogsmeade? Suggested Ron, yawning. I never see him going along any of the secret passageways on the map. I thought they were being watched now anyway. Well then, I don't know, said Ron. Silence fell between them. Harry stared up at the circle of lamplight above him, thinking, if only he had Rufus Scrimgeour's power, he would have been able to set a tail upon Malfoy. But unfortunately, Harry did not have an office full of Aurors at his command. He thought fleetingly of trying to set something up with the DA, but there again was the problem that people would be missed from lessons. Most of them, after all, still had full schedules. There was a low rumbling snore from Ron's bed. After a while, Madame Pomfrey came out of her office, this time wearing a thick dressing gown. It was easiest to feign sleep. Harry rolled over onto his side and listened to all the curtains closing themselves as she waved her wand. The lamps dimmed, and she returned to her office. He heard the door click behind her and knew that she was off to bed. This was, Harry reflected in the darkness, the third time that he had been brought to the hospital wing because of a Quidditch injury. Last time he had fallen off his broom due to the presence of Dementors around the pitch, and the time before that, all the bones had been removed from his arm by the incurably inept Professor Lockhart. That had been his most painful injury by far. He remembered the agony of regrowing an armful of bones in one night, a discomfort not eased by the arrival of an unexpected visitor in the middle of the... Harry sat bolt upright, his heart pounding, his bandaged turban askew. He had the solution at last. There was a way to have Malfoy followed. How could he have forgotten? Why hadn't he thought of it before? But the question was, how to call him? What did you do? Quickly, quietly and tentatively, Harry spoke into the darkness. Creature? There was a very loud crack, and the sounds of scuffling and squeaks filled the silent room. Ron awoke with a yelp. What's going? Harry pointed his wand hastily at the door of Madame Pomfrey's office and muttered, Malfliato, so that she would not come running. Then he scrambled to the end of his bed for a better look at what was going on. 2 house elves were rolling around on the floor in the middle of the dormitory, one wearing a shrunken maroon jumper and several woolly hats, the other a filthy old rag strung over his hips like a loincloth. There was another loud bang, and Peeves the poltergeist appeared in midair above the wrestling elves. I was watching that, Potty, he told Harry indignantly, pointing at the fight below, before letting out a loud cackle. Look at the ickle creatures, squabbling, bitey, punchy, punchy. Creature will not insult Harry Potter in front of Dobby. No, he won't, or Dobby will shut Creature's mouth for him, cried Dobby in a high-pitched voice. Kicky scratchy, cried Peeves happily, now pelting bits of chalk at the elves to enrage them further. Tweaky pokey. Creature will say what he likes about his master, oh yes, and what a master he is. Filthy friend of the mudbloods. Oh, what would poor Creature's mistress say? Exactly what Creature's mistress would have said they did not find out, for at that moment Dobby sank his knobbly little fist into Creature's mouth and knocked out half of his teeth. Harry and Ron both leapt out of their beds and wrenched the 2 elves apart, though they continued to try and kick and punch each other, egged on by Peeves, who swooped around the lamp squealing. Stick your fingers up his nosey, draw his cork, and pull his earsies! Harry aimed his wand at Peeves and said, Langlock! Peeves clutched at his throat, gulped, then swooped from the room making obscene gestures, but unable to speak owing to the fact that his tongue had just glued itself to the roof of his mouth. Nice one, said Ron appreciatively, lifting Dobby into the air so that his flailing limbs no longer made contact with Creature. That was another Prince Hex, wasn't it? Yeah, said Harry, twisting Creature's wizened arm into a half-Nelson. Right, I'm forbidding you to fight each other. Well, Creature, you're forbidden to fight Dobby. Dobby, I know I'm not allowed to give you orders. Dobby is a free house elf, and he can obey anyone he likes, and Dobby will do whatever Harry Potter wants him to do, said Dobby, tears now streaming down his shriveled little face onto his jumper. Okay then, said Harry, and he and Ron both released the elves, who fell to the floor but did not continue fighting. Master called me, croaked Creature, sinking into a bow even as he gave Harry a look that plainly wished him a painful death. Yeah, I did, said Harry, glancing toward Madame Pomfrey's office door to check that the Muffliato spell was still working. There was no sign that she had heard any of the commotion. I've got a job for you. Creature will do whatever Master wants, said Creature, sinking so low that his lips almost touched his gnarled toes. Because Creature has no choice, but Creature is ashamed to have such a master, yes. Dobby will do it, Harry Potter, squeaked Dobby, his tennis ball-sized eyes still swimming with tears. Dobby would be honored to help Harry Potter. Come to think of it, it would be good to have both of you, said Harry. Okay then, I want you to tail Draco Malfoy. Ignoring the look of mingled surprise and exasperation on Ron's face, Harry went on. I want to know where he's going, who he's meeting, and what he's doing. I want you to follow him around the clock. Yes, Harry Potter, said Dobby at once, his great eyes shining with excitement. And if Dobby does it wrong, Dobby will throw himself off the topmost tower, Harry Potter. There won't be any need for that, said Harry hastily. Master wants me to follow the youngest of the Malfoys, croaked Kreacher. Master wants me to spy upon the pureblood great-nephew of my old mistress. That's the one, said Harry, foreseeing a great danger and determined to prevent it immediately. And you're forbidden to tip him off, Kreacher, or to show him what you're up to, or to talk to him at all, or to write him messages, or to contact him in any way. Got it? He thought he could see Kreacher struggling to see a loophole in the instructions he had just been given, and waited. After a moment or two, and to Harry's great satisfaction, Kreacher bowed deeply again, and said with bitter resentment, Master thinks of everything, and Kreacher must obey him, though Kreacher would much rather be the servant of the Malfoy boy, oh yes. That's settled then, said Harry. I'll want regular reports, but make sure I'm not surrounded by people when you turn up. Ron and Hermione are okay, and don't tell anyone what you're doing. Just stick to Malfoy like a couple of war plasters.